Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm WFPG board member Michelle Lynch, and on behalf of the Women's Foreign Policy Group, I'd like to welcome you to today's conversation on countering tech-facilitated gender-based violence and intimidation, an issue that has wide-reaching impact on the safety and well-being of women and girls, as well as our ability to fully participate in society and governance. The Women's Foreign Policy Group is a network of international affairs professionals dedicated to advancing women's leadership and amplifying their voices through substantive global issues programs and mentoring, as well as diversifying the pipeline and preparing for the next generation of leadership through mentoring and professional development. When we look at protecting the rights of women and girls, we can't do so in a vacuum. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by conflict and disasters, from the senseless and horrifying war in Ukraine to the spiraling humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. This program is part of a series of discussions that WFPG is hosting to highlight the range of initiatives and commitments from the Generation Equality Forum. 25 years after the Beijing Platform for Action, UN Women and its partners brought together stakeholders and launched an ambitious 5-year action plan to accelerate gender equality, led by 6 action coalitions or multi-stakeholder committees. It's my pleasure to welcome our panelists today for this very timely and important discussion. I will keep introductions brief since we have a lot to cover, but I encourage you to visit the link in the chat to read their bios. Ambassador Katri Viinikka, a career diplomat and gender advocate, currently serves as Ambassador for Gender Equality with Finland's Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Finland is one of the leaders of the Action Coalition. Monica Aleman Cunningham, a senior program officer for the Building Institutions and Networks team at the Ford Foundation, where she supports their work to develop stronger, sustainable, and more effective social justice organizations and networks. Patricia Georgiou, Director of Partnerships and Business Development at Jigsaw, Google and Alphabet's incubator tackling geopolitical challenges through technology. Shreeja Sen, a trained lawyer and a research associate at IT for Change India, where she focuses on online gender-based violence and the emerging challenges in India. And Hélène Molinier, a senior manager for the Action Coalition on Innovation and Technology at UN Women. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome back today's moderator and longtime WFPG member and mentor, Sandra Pepera, who serves as Director for Gender, Women, and Democracy at NDI. We have a lot of expertise on the call today, as you can see, and as with all of our programs, we want to include your questions. So please send them in during the conversation using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to include as many as we can. Before we jump into the discussion, I'll turn the program over to Hélène from the Action Coalition on Innovation and Technology to set the stage. And then Sandra, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to open this conversation with this exciting panel of speakers. Exactly 1 year ago today, the Generation Equality Forum kicked off in Mexico and was the occasion to launch 6 multi-stakeholder coalitions, including the one I have the privilege to manage on technology innovation for gender equality. And as many of you may know, Generation Equality was convened by UN Women to accelerate progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and also towards the full implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. The forum was a groundbreaking moment in many aspects, but also because it was the very first time that digital technology strongly came up as a gender priority at an international event of this scale. And the theme of this coalition is really a powerful statement. It's telling the world that women and girls don't have equal digital rights and that this is becoming the new face of inequality. The internet is supposed to be for everyone, but yet everyone is far from having the same opportunities to access it, to develop it, and is far from having the same experience once online. Not everyone feels free to chat with people, to share content, to express opinions, or just to play video games. This is one of the 4 priorities identified by the leaders of the coalition, to try to see how we can focus on preventing and eliminating online and tech-facilitated gender-based violence and discrimination. Online violence is silencing women's and girls' voices all around the world. It's leading them to be scared, stressed, unsafe, and self-censoring. It is also shaping their attitudes towards technology, as very often the abuse and harassment they face when they start accessing the digital world is influencing how they use digital tools for the rest of their lives. The objective of the coalition is to make sure that world leaders supporting generation equality make concrete commitments to address these issues, commitments for which they will be held accountable. And you will hear today about some of these amazing commitment makers. Some are working on improving social media platform tools and systems to avoid harm and improve user care services. Some are advocating for online gender-based violence to be prioritized in international fora and to strengthen national policies and legal frameworks. Some are focusing on social norms and on changing the culture that amplifies the continuum of violence between offline and online situations. The Action Coalition aims to provide new directions for building inclusive and participatory partnerships. Its members have a unique opportunity to work together as a multi-stakeholder group to develop advocacy campaigns, to share learning, to leverage resources, and strengthen political engagement all around the world. We have a huge challenge ahead of us, and we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated this problem. It is our collective responsibility to make sure every woman and girls have the full opportunity to achieve their potential, can safely access and use technology, and take the lead in shaping a better world. So once again, we are very thankful for the opportunity of presenting the work of the coalition, and we look very much forward to today's conversations.
Thank you, Hélène. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And it's wonderful to be here today with you all to discuss this hugely important issue. First of all, let me give my thanks. Many thanks to the Women's Foreign Policy Group. Some of you will know that we lost a great champion for women's foreign policy engagement in the shape of Madeleine Albright, Secretary Madeleine Albright, as she was just a week ago. She was the chair of NDI's board, and I was privileged to have worked with her over the last 7 years whilst I've been here. But it just reminded me that those of us who share the privilege that we all do need to use that privilege and remember those that Michelle mentioned in her introduction, our sisters, our colleagues in places like Ukraine and Afghanistan and Ethiopia and many other places right now. So women's voice in foreign policy is important. And I know that Madeleine would be kind of cheering me on as I say that and express my thanks to WFPG for all you do to strengthen that network of women's voice in foreign policy. And also my thanks to Hélène for so ably setting the scene and providing the background on the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Tech and Innovation. You know, there are times when I can't believe just how fast we've moved from some of us crying in the wilderness on the issue of online gender-based violence to everyone being seized by the issue. And perhaps we're coming to a moment of real change being possible. From economic empowerment to professional issues to democracy, what happens to women and girls online betrays the tremendous opportunity for inclusion, diversity, and equity that the digital space should offer. The fact that it took the recognized inventor of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, just 30 years to acknowledge in 2019 that the internet is not working for women and girls is indicative of how deeply dismissed women and girls' experiences of misogyny, harassment, and discrimination online had been. Even as recently as 2 years ago, my colleagues and I here, we were always first asked to quantify the issue, as if there was a number at which we would all agree that a problem existed. That doesn't happen as often today for two interesting reasons. First, there's been a lot of research done on the rights of women and girls in all their diversity to actually access the internet, as Hélène set out that agenda. And second, frankly, we found out that many of the tech companies knew what was happening all along. I'm absolutely not suggesting that technology can solve the misogyny that binds all of us, of every gender and none, to harmful gender norms, pretty much wherever we are in the world. But we do believe that misogyny online is a solvable problem for tech, and it's time that accountable change is achieved. So let's start our conversation here. Ambassador Viinikka from Finland. Many of us do have a love-hate relationship with technology. It should be helping us to overcome barriers to information that enable economic empowerment and participation in democracy and sustainable peace, but it's failing. Can we really think of democratic renewal without cleaning up the internet?
Thank you very much, Sandra, for this very important question. And first of all, I would also like to thank Women's Foreign Policy Group for organizing this very important event, and of course join all previous speakers in expressing my solidarity to the women of Ukraine and also those of Afghanistan. We are going through a really horrible situation in the world. But to answer your question, the short answer is no. I think that online gender-based violence really prevents the full and equal participation of women and girls in public life. And this really has major negative consequences for democracy, as freedom of speech is restricted for women and girls by hate speech and by other forms of abuse, which really discourage public participation. So this is really major problem for functioning of democracy. And I think that there are three groups for which the silencing is especially strong, and those are politicians, journalists, and girls. And let me say a couple of words about politicians. I think this is also very pertinent in my country, Finland, because we have a female-led government. We have a young female prime minister, Sanna Marin, and we have a coalition government where all 5 parties actually are chaired by women. So this is something quite extraordinary in the whole world, I think. But even in our country, we really have experience of female politicians being harassed online. And actually last year, NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence conducted a study on online harassment against the Finnish government and found that women ministers received a disproportionate number of abusive messages. And then to journalists, I think nearly 2 out of 3 women journalists have been threatened or harassed online. And just because of their gender, women journalists face an additional layer of risk next to the attacks that all journalists are increasingly experiencing. And we see this in all these war situations. And it violates their right to freedom of expression as much as it hampers free and open access to information for all members of society. And then third group, girls. According to a very important study by the NGO Plan International, over half of the girl respondents had experienced cyberbullying or harassment online. And the numbers were even higher for girls belonging to an ethnic, sexual or gender minority, an immigrant background, or with disabilities. And I think this also highlights a need for intersectional approach. This is something that Finland very much stresses, that it's important to take into consideration the intersection of factors that affect an individual, not only gender. And this is something we also want to really highlight in different international negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'm privileged to have had a conversation with your former minister, Astrid Thors, who I believe was one of the first women in Finland able to take an online harasser to court for the online harassment she faced and the threats that she faced. So I know that Finland, you've had a view on this for quite some time and been able to develop some framework to address this. I want to go to Shreeja because, Shreeja, online gender-based violence is famously borderless and transactional, which poses challenges to judicial action. What are you tracking the Indian judiciary's response to online GBV? What have you found and what are you seeing them doing in this space?
Right. Thanks so much, Sandra. And again, thanks also to the organizers for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. I will get to our findings on what the Indian judiciary is doing, but I'd like to begin with presenting IT for Change's core goals for addressing issues of online gender-based violence. Our studies have shown that online space creates a unique scope for violence to be perpetrated, not often because of the type of content, but because of the virality, volume, and expanse of messages that women and other marginalized groups receive. And that is something Ambassador Viinikka was also, talking about. In that regard, we believe that it is imperative to pursue three distinct perspectives here. First, that there needs to be a feminist understanding and gendered reading of freedom of expression. This is something we also included in our submissions to the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression last year. This essentially means that there is a need to ensure that freedom of expression does not mean unfreedom for women and non-binary people on the internet, that those on the margins have a space to create their own communities and find their own identities. Second, that online gender-based violence needs to be addressed through the lens of substantive equality, dignity, and privacy that includes aspects of personal autonomy, bodily integrity, and informational privacy. This ensures that we center the conversation around the survivor and their rights and not other considerations. And finally, that online intermediaries, especially those with a global presence and large number of users, need to be made responsible and accountable for online harms. IT for Change has specifically conducted 2 studies recently under our recognized resist and remedy project. One is the judicial action that you were speaking about, Sandra, which is where we reviewed several cases on issues of online gender-based violence, and a second where we reviewed Twitter hate that women in public life received. The Twitter study, interestingly, reflects deep connections between a woman's social identity and hate speech that they receive. Again, something that Ambassador Viinikka was talking about. Now, through the case law research that we conducted, we gathered that in cases where there are a mix of offline and online offenses can often take a backseat, which of course is not something we want, but it happens across the board. In the Indian context specifically, gendered hate speech is also not recognized within the law, which makes cases of trolling and doxing that much harder to prosecute. However, there are also some positive trends. Though seen only in a handful of cases, courts are increasingly more cognizant of the role of online intermediaries, and they were clear in these cases that intermediaries like YouTube, Google, Facebook need to take down harmful content urgently and not hide behind safe harbor provisions. Both these studies that we've conducted reflect the need for a law in India holding online intermediaries responsible. And these include the social media companies that we generally talk about. And for these companies to extend a duty of care to their users, and also an requirement of an independent regulatory authority to oversee their activities. I will stop here and we can talk about it further.
Thank you, Shreeja. That's really important and exciting. And I know we still have Hélène Molinier with us. I wonder, Hélène, at some point, maybe you would talk about how what the Tech and Innovation Group is doing will indeed, if you like, infuse across all the other pillars, because tech and innovation, as you said, it's a thing in itself, but it's also a conduit for many of the other action coalitions that are created under generation equality. And that might be something that you have a thought about later on. I want to come to Monica now at the Ford Foundation. And our two speakers already have started to preview this issue. We've always said that to address online gender-based violence, as indeed to address all gender-based violence, we need multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder, and multi-annual approaches. None of this is going to go in a day. When you look at civil society around the world, where are the opportunities and where are the gaps for working with advocates on the online issue?
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, and hello, good morning and good afternoon. Good evening to everyone who's joining us today. It is a pleasure for us to be part of this conversation. I have to start by saying that we are certainly new players, and we know that we are yet to learn how to do this work. So I think it will be hard for me to start by saying, you know, giving answers to all of the questions, but it is an issue that we are beginning to pay more attention and that we hope to dedicate more resources to, so that eventually we can end up in a place in which we can have some answers here. I would say for now, there are 4 priorities that we are looking into. The first one is that we are increasing funding towards effective programming in this area. The second is that we hope that our programming that we are providing funding for reflects diverse priorities and priorities particular for population groups that are not always at the center of the conversation. The third priority is that we are seeking to provide resources for greater coordination and collaboration across multiple stakeholders working on this issue. And the fourth priority is that we want to provide funding to expand global norms and frameworks on issues related to gender-based violence, and in particular issues related to online violence. As you very much stated before, we believe this is a solvable problem, but that it is essential for us to put more resources and more attention to it. I will say for us right now, if I am to think of the opportunity, is that we have an institution like Ford that is ready and willing to learn. So that is an opportunity. The second is we understand that there are players out there. But I think right now our main challenge is how do we create the necessary bridges and extend channels of communication so that we are funding those organizations. And that is work in progress and something that we hope that we can do in the years to come. As you can imagine, we very much believe in our partnership, and our principal role is to provide grant making. So this space for us is important because we want to hear about the initiatives that have been working, and we want to be able to extend those channels of communication with those organizations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Monica. Not often that people say, we don't know enough yet, so we're not going to try and answer the question, but then follow up with a commitment to providing new resources and support to some of those mechanisms. So thank you for that. Patricia, hi. You know, we've been in conversation with you and your colleagues at Jigsaw for a number of years now. And I remember explaining early on that many of the women we work with would say that first, they don't know who to call when they are being attacked. And second, when they did find a number, no one answered the phone. But I know that you've all been working really hard in recent years. So please tell us more about the tools you've developed and how successfully they're being used. And perhaps what more those of us who are here can do to make sure women know what tools are out there and how to protect themselves using them.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Indeed, it's been a pleasure working with you as well as other organizations who are represented here today. Jigsaw is a unit within Google that focuses on digital threats, including online harassment, and online violence against women has been, as you know, a big focus area for us for several years now, hence the close collaboration with all of you. In terms of addressing any of these threats that we tackle, we always start by conducting research to better understand the problem. And obviously you're all familiar with its intensity and its impact, but we wanted to really visualize what it looked like. And we started by mapping the global index of online violence against women, which we published last year with the Economist Intelligence Unit. And it really corroborates what we've been saying, which is that women have a disproportionate amount of harassment that they experience online, and that it has big impact on not just them personally in terms of their professional personal experience, but on democracy and our societies at large, which is why we care about it so much. And obviously journalists have it worse. There are some United Nations reports that point out that journalists, for female journalists, they have much more likelihood of being attacked than men, and that has an impact on their ability to report on stories. So we actually conducted a lot of user research interviews with journalists like Rana Ayub, for example, in India, who was the victim of a fake porn video because she was covering a story of government corruption, and Maria Ressa in the Philippines, to really understand their needs. And what they told us was that they experience online violence in a lot of different ways, but the most prevalent technique of harassment is comments in social media. So this is why we decided to partner with Twitter to develop some technology tools that would actually address the problem where women journalists and activists and other high-risk users are experiencing it, which is their actual Twitter feeds. So what we've been working on for the last few years, and what we actually open sourced earlier this month, is the code for a new technology called Harassment Manager that allows these high-risk users like journalists and activists and politicians to actually manage the harassment that they receive on their social media, starting with Twitter. So this tool will allow them to, first of all, identify the bad comments, because sometimes it's just too overwhelming. They can't read everything. So they need our technology to help them detect. So, Jigsaw for several years now has built a technology called Perspective, which is machine learning that can actually read comments and detect the most toxic ones much more quickly than a human would be able to do. So that helps victims of harassment actually extract the bad comments without having to be re-traumatized by reading every single one of them. So first of all, extracting the bad comments. Then you can actually generate a report. Shreeja was mentioning that sometimes you don't have evidence to take to law enforcement. So this tool actually allows them to generate a report automatically without having to do like manual screenshot. You're talking about the phone. Like imagine having to call 911 for every single of these attackers online. It's impossible, right? So this report allows you to do that in a scaled way, automated way. And then you can also actually manage your feed for others to see that it's less toxic, because you can actually take action through the API to basically remove a toxic comment, delete a reply, hide a reply, and even block the users who have been harassing you. So we're hoping that this tool that we just open sourced a couple of weeks ago will actually allow to remove a lot of that toxicity for people who experience it the most. And obviously this was built on a lot of expertise from us in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence, as well as partnerships with Twitter and a lot of organizations, including yours and others who are represented here today. We've been committed to this issue since the Action Coalition. And so we're hoping that this first step, as Hélène was saying, technology is not the silver bullet. It's not the solution to everything. And you were saying it's a multi-stakeholder problem, but we're hoping that at least, this will be the first step, and that this tool will be, it's open source. Everybody can use it. Developers, organizations, they can adapt it to their needs, and they can expand it to other platforms beyond Twitter. So we're hoping that it's the first step, but of course, it's not going to be the end all be all. And so we're also doing more work with, obviously, all the tech companies have their policies in terms of what they remove. Shreeja was mentioning the removal. We have a lot of constant updates to our policies to remove toxic comments. And then we also try to improve our algorithms. I was mentioning our Perspective API. We also have, efforts to detect misogyny, because misogyny is not necessarily as obviously toxic as something that is very hateful, etc. Sometimes it's a bit more innuendo. So we keep trying to improve our technology by training our algorithms to detect specifically misogynist comments, for example. And then there's much more. There's this tool, but there's other ways that women can keep themselves safe online. So we conduct a lot of digital safety training, so women are more familiar with digital security tools that already exist. Last year alone, we did trainings for more than 2,000 women around the world. And we also did hackathons so that women can actually come up with new ideas, because, we're a technology company. We're not, we don't have their personal experience. So based on their personal experience, women can come up with more ideas of tools that that could be helpful to their experience. So, it's an iterative process. But harassment manager is a big first step that we've been taking with Twitter, and we're hoping to continue to do more in this space.
Thanks, Patricia. And I always comment on your passion for this, and I know that you are definitely personally committed, and your team is. And of course, we're all having to, if you like, to your point, overcome some of the structural issues in the design. And how we actually address design issues at the source is going to be something that we will all have to pay more attention to going forward. I want to remind our participants, please be putting your questions into the Q&A so that we can curate them. In about 10 minutes, we'll move to an open conversation and take some of those questions. But very quickly, in a last round, and I'll ask you all to be really to the point. Ambassador, let me come back to you, because what is the role of governments? Allowing that not all governments are going to be good faith actors in this area of addressing online harassment and hate against women, because they have other, if you like, they have other objectives. What do you think the role of government should be?
Well, of course, we know that there are lots of challenges to gender equality on the intergovernmental track at the moment, and this is at the first place. I think why the Generation Equality campaign was actually launched. But let me comment on the actions of the government of Finland and more in general. Governments, of course, they have a huge role in setting up the scene, and in which the private sector actors and civil society actors operate. And of course, it's also up to the governments to ensure that there is a legal framework for holding the perpetrators accountable. And I think, for instance, even in a society like Finland, we need lots of training for different kind of authorities, the police, the courts, for instance. They are not aware enough of this problem, and what I would also like to stress is the need to engage men. And there is a compulsory military service still in Finland, and this is something that we see as a platform for raising awareness among young men. So there is a training module for these young conscripts, and I think this for instance is an example where you could really include components on online gender-based violence, and then of course international fora where international norms are being created, we try to be active and promote this issue. And one important example is that the European Commission recently made a proposal to introduce European Union-wide rules to combat violence against women and domestic violence. And this new legislative proposal includes criminalizing cyber violence. So of course the negotiations among EU member states haven't actually started yet, or are at a very early phase, but this is a very important step to really improve and develop international legislation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. Really important to flag the kind of regional approach as well, because as we mentioned earlier on, this unfortunately this is a borderless and transnational activity, and so looking at it on a regional basis may be an important step forward. So thank you for that. Shreeja, when you were talking earlier on about your your three areas of distinct action, you did mention privacy, and I just wanted to ask you, because in your focus on sort of a gendered approach to some of these things, I'm certainly very kind of seized, and I know those working in the sort of regular gender-based violence space are really seized about what's happening with the new and perfectly legitimate home and personal security devices, and how these are both transgressing privacy and also creating new modes for control and negative behaviors like that. Is there anything that you're doing that really we should hear about that spotlights that particular area?
So our work has not focused on personal devices that sort of infringe on privacy of individuals. However, just to focus a little bit on what kind of privacy that we want to bring focus on in the specific case of online gender-based violence, it is those three prongs that I mentioned. One, that is bodily integrity; two, personal autonomy; and three, informational privacy. So because in the cases that we reviewed and in the Twitter study that I was mentioning, we see a lot of instances where women are doxxed, women's personal information is made public, or a lot of non-consensual intimate images distribution cases come up as well. So all of these sort of need to be looked at from a privacy perspective, rather than what in India we see is a very sort of patriarchal perspective of modesty and honor. So when a woman's intimate images are made public on the internet, it shouldn't be seen from the perspective of, oh, okay, her honor has been affected. Rather, we should look at it from the perspective of her right to privacy has been violated. So that's the perspective that we have been studying, rather than more of the sort of devices that sort of violate privacy. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
I think that's hugely important, and thanks for that. And I think, to your point, the distinction between it being an honor issue and a rights issue is hugely important, given the dynamics around empowerment and disempowerment that are at the heart of feminist discourse on some of these issues. So thank you for that. Patricia, you talked about Twitter, and we know that you're not responsible for the whole internet space, but it's still only a handful of companies are responsible for the vast majority of that space. Any signs of you all coming together to work in a more kind of coherent and comprehensive way on some of these issues? And anything you can say about that? It goes to some of the issues that we talked about how we collaborate and how we actually develop critical mass for action and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I wish I was more in charge of all of that, because you know where my direction would go. But yes, of course, we're trying to. We're always trying to collaborate more. You know, the harassment manager tool that I was mentioning before that we just released was a collaboration with Twitter, and we're hoping that it will just be the beginning and that it will inspire others to come to the table as well. And we also have other collaborations on other topics. And by the way, you know, Shreeja was talking about doxing. There are a lot of efforts also in that space around, you know, identifying doxes or calls to harass people online, using people's personal information or personal imagery to attack them online. There's a lot that you know, that we're trying to do in that space. So, you know, it's an ongoing effort, but it's really a complex effort, because there is this also this hurdle to collaboration between tech companies, which is privacy, because we want to respect the privacy of the users. So it's not that easy to actually, you know, collaborate on these issues while respecting the privacy of the users who don't necessarily want to share their credentials from one platform to the other. But there's a lot of willingness and commitment to these issues from all the tech companies. I mean, we all committed to the Action Coalition last year. And, you know, again, the things that I was mentioning are only, you know, part of a much broader effort across the ecosystem.
Thanks. And of course, that issue of, as you described it, of privacy in terms of, if you like, consumer privacy, in terms of people not sharing their data across platforms, is a contested space, of course, and because we know a lot of data is mined with people barely understanding what's happening to their data. But it's helpful to know that at least there are some sparks of collaboration in parts of the universe with regards to working together on these issues. And again, I do want to remind our participants that, you know, we're open to Q&A, so please drop any questions you do have into the Q&A function. Hélène, I saw you sort of come back, and I unfairly sort of threw a question at you when you weren't really expecting to have to answer another question. But you know, I think it's a fair point that, you know, tech and innovation, yes, it's an issue and a means and a goal in and of itself, but it's going to influence so much more across the whole spectrum of the accelerated empowerment that generation equality is really trying to drive. Can you give us any sort of ideas about how you are integrating that aspect across all the action coalitions?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And yes, indeed, I think this is why we were so excited to have the coalition. We felt that otherwise we have technology come up as an afterthought, or it's just see as a mean another topic. But it also provides us now the opportunity to have really work across the coalitions. And Ford Foundation, for example, that is here today, is the leader of the GBV coalition. And so we see a lot of interaction between the leaders of these two coalitions to see how we can build bridges, as we see that there is a continuum between offline and online violence. There's definitely also work that we want to engage with the Action Coalition, focusing on feminist movement and feminist leadership, because as we've heard today, it's so hard for women that wants to be in politics right now to really go through an entire election cycle without being harassed online. So whether you are a young person who wants to be much more active in civic life, or if you want to engage in politics, this is really definitely something that all women that we've talked to mention as a fear that they have, and sometimes as something that makes them actually leave office and move to other careers. So there's so much to be done there. And also with the Action Coalition on Economic Justice, very important to see that now more and more, especially for women entrepreneurs, for example, being present on social media, on digital platform, it's huge for their marketing, their communication. And again, it's very hard for them, and they are facing much more abuse and harassment online that other users. So it's going to be central to the work of the coalition to see how we can build these bridges between topics so that we're not working in silos. And as you've seen today, having a multi-stakeholder approach, because I think, as Patricia mentioned, it's not technology that's going to be solving the problem itself. It's not going to be government that are going to be solving these issues on their own. As you rightly mentioned, in many countries, it's clearly not a priority for government to address this kind of abuse and harassment that is taking place. So we need to have this multi-stakeholder approach to really act together and move political engagement, but also work on culture, work on social norms, and see how we can address the underlying factors that are creating this violence online.
Thanks, Hélène. And I think we'll all recognize that first dilemma is, do you have something alone, or do you try and put sort of seeds in every single other coalition? So I'm glad to hear that you've kind of got a strategic perspective on that, and that's useful to know for others who may be working in other parts of the action coalitions, that there is this kind of running thread that will appear in all. Monica, I wanted to know from, one of the 4 areas that you mentioned were to change the global norms or to support the change in global norms on these issues. We've really been talking about the online space as a problem. Are you seeing any new and innovative kind of ways in which online activity, online means of being can help address gender-based violence more broadly? Has that come to anything, particularly through the Action Coalition, perhaps, where we're not talking about online facilitated harms, but perhaps online facilitated reforms and protections and change? Anything coming through in that way?
I would say, in general, in the context of the Action Coalition, it has not come through. However, I do believe that, as Hélène was saying, that it is important for us to, when it comes to expanding the norms and frameworks under which we are working, for us to make a greater connection at the jurisprudence level and at the conceptual level, because I don't think we are doing that enough. I think that right now, even though there is an understanding that violence is taking place, there is not enough conversation about the kinds of frameworks that need to be put in place that connect directly with the work of the other action coalitions, or at least not in the process that led to the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. So I will say that is something that is yet to be achieved. However, I do think that it is important for us to think of the online space as not only a space where problems take place, but that there is also tremendous opportunities for it. And in that sense, we think that shifting narratives is a key opportunity for us. And shifting narrative in the online world around what constitutes violence and who gets to be that voice on how to eliminate that violence, but also get to define that violence, is really, really important. How we do it, again, I think that we are still at an early stage defining how we take control back of that space of how that shifting narrative is taking place, but it is something that I will say we are very much interested on. And we are interested on because, as I said earlier, we want to bring voices to that space of women that are not often at the centers, whether those are women with disabilities or indigenous women or women of color, so that they can get to use the tools that are available for them to define, how they want to be portrayed in that space, but also use it as a community and as a space where they can build strength with each other.
Thanks, Monica. That's again really powerful and a vision that I think we can all kind of relate to. Now, there's a question in the chat that I'm going to sort of ask Patricia and Shreeja to address, because I suspect you come at it with very different perspectives. And it is on that piece we touched on just a little bit, which is about how the protections that we need to think about when creating even tools that are supportive of addressing online harms, that issue of the protections that we need to include with regards to data and the extraction, if you like, of data. Patricia, how are your companies really kind of addressing this point? Because obviously, whilst we want women to be safe, we don't want it's an unintended consequence, if you like, for their data to be further exploited. And I think, Shreeja, you may also have a perspective on this from your organization's point of view. So let me go to Patricia first.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So privacy is really the top of mind concern for us. User privacy is really for Google and other tech companies. Well, I can speak for Google at least, and Jigsaw in particular. Privacy is really the #1 concern when it comes to users. And so we always have privacy first when we're building and designing a new tool. And this is true for all the tools that I've mentioned. So Perspective API, for example, the machine learning algorithms that can read comments and detect which ones are toxic, this does not get any user data. We just look at the comment itself, which is sent to us by, Reddit or the New York Times. They're the ones who have the comments, and they just send the comments for analysis. So we don't see which users posted which comment. We don't have any user data on that one. And the same is true for the harassment manager tool that I just mentioned to manage the harassment on Twitter feeds. That also does not retain any Twitter data or user data, because it's basically built on top of your Twitter feed, but you only upload the comments in that specific tool, and no data is retained or actually even shared with our models. So yes, it's very much a concern for us, and we're always prioritizing for protecting users' privacy and users' data. But of course, we want these tools to be useful, so we conduct user research interviews, but these are just part of the normal research process, where we interview journalists who have experienced harassment, activists, politicians who can share their experience, but they're not sharing their actual data with us.
Great, thanks. Shreeja.
Yes, Sandra, thank you. And thank you, Patricia, for explaining all of the things that are in progress, and especially including the tool like Harassment Manager and things like that. I, of course, like you said, Sandra, have a slightly different perspective, especially from my organization's point of view as well. It is, I feel, important to acknowledge that data is how these tech companies grow and develop at all times. The extraction, as you said, of data is important for them to continue to grow and develop and do the things that they intend to do with their technology and things like that. So I feel like that is what should also grant, that is what brings in this responsibility on tech companies to ensure that as these platforms that on which hate is being perpetrated, they become responsible for controlling them. So something like a harassment manager is great, and all of these processes that are taking place are great, but there is an element of individualizing the issue, where someone who is being affected by all of this hate online has to take up that effort to sort of go ahead and figure out how do I collect all of this information, or how do I generate this report, how do I make a complaint on Twitter that I'm facing so and so trolling and so on. So we should be focused on not individualizing the problem, since a lot of these are also systemic issues, and the responsibility on tech companies has to be larger than what it is currently, and which is what I think I also started with by saying that social media companies and online intermediaries need to be held more responsible for all of this online harm that is going on. And I completely appreciate all of the effort that is ongoing, but I feel like we need to take a few more steps after the first one.
Thanks, Shreeja. And we're coming almost to time, but one, I think, question that we could put to perhaps probably to Hélène and Monica, because you're within the Action Coalitions, is again, really, what are you seeing in terms of how the online space is to be used for women's movement? You know, women are the forefront of so much reform and change and resistance right now. Hélène, what are you seeing in terms of women using online space, for example, to pursue peace and security objectives, or to mobilize for climate change? So that business about the online space and women's movement. Anything that is immediately to your mind with regards to what you're seeing across the coalitions, for example?
I mean, I can come, but I know that Monica has to leave, so maybe I'm gonna ask Monica to enter, and then I'll be happy to come second.
Yes, thank you, Hélène, because I have to leave early. But just to say, I mean, as I said earlier, we think that this is a space of opportunity, particularly for transnational organizing. In fact, we, in the context of the Generation Equality Forum, we made a commitment of $5 million to the establishment of the Newmont Fund, which is a new feminist-led fund that is expected to expand the use of digital technology and its tools for feminist organizing, but also to build capacity across different movements so that we can obviously reach the potential that this space offers us. While at the same time, we recognize the limitations and the danger that this space offers. And in that sense, from the perspective of the Building Institutions program that I am part of, we recently launched a cybersecurity program. And the hope is that we can continue to build the capacity of civil society organizations to, yes, do organizing, but also be mindful of some of the challenges that come with operating in this space, particularly to challenges that are that affect in a disproportionate manner women and girls in different parts of the world, I will say.
Right. Well, thank you. And Hélène, I'm sorry, we are to time. And so I'm going to very swiftly thank all of you and thank our participants, and hand over to Kim to give us a wrap.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you to all of our speakers for taking the time to speak with us today, and to all of our participants and their great questions. Support like yours is critical to enabling us to continue our work to hold issue-based discussions with women leaders in international affairs. We hope that you'll stay connected, join us as a member if you aren't already, and that you'll consider giving your time as a mentor at one of our upcoming programs. Thank you so much, and we look forward to welcoming you at another program soon.